So I'm going to demonstrate direct warping with a warping peg on a striped warp. Uh, this is nothing different from what I've shown in previous episodes where I did direct warping, but some people might be unfamiliar with this technique, which is the fastest way to warp you're ever going to come across. And it's a really fun way to design in the reed, kind of design as you go. And this time I am switching colors. So as I mentioned, I did draw up a rough sketch. So I did my design on paper very clumsily and did some rough calculations so that I would know my width in reed was going to be 16 inches. And this is my setup. Honestly, the hardest thing about direct warping is that you need space for it because the yarn has to go from my apron bar, and you can see my cones of warp yarn sitting on the floor there. The yarn has to go in a straight line from the apron bar on my loom to the warping peg. So this is a short warp. This is only 2.5 yards. When I do longer warps, the setup is much more challenging because, and yes, I want you to see the mess here in my place, uh, because this isn't a very big place. I don't have a lot of space. I don't have long stretches of open area where I can manage this. And many of the places I've tried it have not worked out really well. If I were doing a longer warp, I might actually have to set up my loom in my bathroom and then put this is what I've found to be the best way to secure my warping peg. Put my bench and warping peg in my bedroom because that's where I've got the longest run possible, I think, in my whole home. One of the other things I've learned the hard way, don't ask me how, is you have to have room to walk on either side of the loom. You'll see in a moment when I start warping that I don't need to go around the bench to get to the warping peg. I can do it from this in this space, but I do have to be able to walk around the loom and uh, to change colors, to tie things, and inevitably, it never, ever, ever, ever fails. The scissors I set down in an inaccessible place. So, thanks to the way my little home is set up, I can, if I need to get into the bathroom suddenly or the bedroom, I can go around my island. There's space there. I can get around the loom easily enough on both sides. I've got space over here for my actual warping path until I get to the far side of the warp here. And that's going to present a little bit of a challenge. So I'm going to do that next. I'm going to fill in this side of the warp. And this angle, busy as it is, there's a lot of crap in the background. Sorry about that. And there's likely to be a cat wandering by. But this angle will give you a clearer sense of what I'm doing here on the apron bar because it's actually really simple. Once I get to that warping peg on my bench, all I'm doing is laying a loop around it and walking back to the back of the loom. So hopefully I can now manage this without, knocking over the camera every 3 seconds and bumping into things and all that. It is also helpful to have scissors right next to me or here in the trap of my flip loom, which is installed right on the loom itself. So if you've got a rigid heddle loom that you can put a trap on, do eat. You will be really, really happy. Okay, so the next sequence I want to work is with my 5/2, my skinnier cotton in navy. So you can see, grab my sketch. A lot of my weaving life is basically running the obstacle course of my home. So I've done the purple, the ink, and the purple in the middle. Now I'm going to do a 3-inch swath of navy. And since I'm working with a 12 dent reed, that's going to be 12 times 3, which is 36 ends. But then because I'm direct warping, I'm going to just fill in 18 slots here in my reed. And we can come in even closer if need be. Okay, so right now, all you can see is my rear apron bar, my rigid heddle, and tools are going to come. My heddle hook is going to come through these slots as I go. And remember that with direct warping, you're only filling the slots in the reed, and then when you come back before you tie on at the front apron rod or bar, you're just moving one of those two threads over. Okay, so I have tied a loop here with the navy yarn, and you can see it's visually obvious how much thinner this 5/2 cotton is than the 3/2 cotton. Tied it in a loop, and I'm going to fill in 18 of these slots by inserting my heddle hook in the proper place, pulling it through, and I'm leaving a long loop at this end so that when I walk out of frame in a second, I can just carry it straight to my warping peg. Okay, so all I did off camera was lay the loop of yarn around the warping peg without letting it sag or stretch. And when I've done a couple more threads, when I've done this whole section, I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, now I'm back at the back of the loom again, and this is the really important part. I've just pulled the working yarn around the apron bar again, and I'm putting it through the next loop. If you don't pull it around the apron bar, you're going to end up with a warp end that's much too short. And yeah, I know, I keep going off camera. And I'm just going to do this until I have filled up 3 inches at 12 ends per inch, which is 36 cut in half because I'm doing 2 threads in each slot. Now, if I wanted to, and in fact, this is how I did the V shape, the V wrap that I just took off this loom, I could design these colors as I go. What I did on that one was I laid out all the warp yarns I wanted to use. Okay, I'm, again, always making sure that I'm going around this apron bar as I come around before I go into the rigid heddle. What I did with the V-shaped wrap was I just basically set all my yarns, my warp yarns, on the floor and made a color arrangement that I thought looked good and just kind of winged it, winged it, I guess is the proper past tense. And it turned out to be okay. Okay, I just hit something that is going to be a problem down the road, so I want to fix it before I go. There's a knot in my warp yarn. And so to fix it, I'm going to set down my heddle hook, break the yarn, and I have enough before the knot to run down to the warping peg, but then I have to tie on at the warping peg. And again, I know you can't see this, but it's the exact same thing I just did around the apron bar. So again, making sure that it's not sloppy, that it's not sagging, that it's not too taut. I'm just making an overhand knot. Whoops, that's the wrong end. Making an overhand knot around the warping peg. And because this is the end that's already on the loom, it's going to be fine. I've got a lot of play in this before I need to worry about, and I'll refine the tensioning on it when I get to, as I tie onto the front apron bar, you know what I mean? Just like my cats always know which one of them I'm talking to, even if I call them by the wrong name. Okay. So normally in indirect warping, books tell you, oh, don't do it if you have an odd number of ends in a stripe sequence or something, but it's actually fine. There's no reason not to tie on at the warping peg if, for instance, you're running a stripe with an odd number of warp ends in it. Because remember, the warp ends are coming through that slot in a pair, and it's no big deal to just adjust. So if you need to, whenever you need to, just tie on at the front at the warping peg. Just make sure, unless you're planning for a crammed and spaced kind of effect in your warp, that you are always running 2 threads through a slot. And so because I tied on at the front apron bar for this pair, sorry, not the front apron bar, the warping peg, because I tied on one of these ends at the warping peg, I have to tie its mate at the warping peg as well. So I've now got 2 tied off loops on the warping peg. Okay, so I'm just going to do this, and then when it's time to change colors, I can just do the same thing with the next color. I will tie on at the back apron bar, and then I will start making my loops until I've filled up enough of the weaving width that I want, and finish off. So you can see that this is really, really simple. Again, the most important thing is to not let your yarns stretch or sag as they are traveling from the apron bar to the warping peg. And that is sometimes easier said than done. So what's not a problem in direct warping is the yarn kind of going higher, because it's just a simple law of physics. And you should, as you're using the warping, as you're winding around the warping peg, keep pushing down, pushing down. But the laws of geometry mean that as you fill up more warp yarn on this peg, it is of necessity going to rise on this peg, and that's going to change the angle at which the warp yarn is running through these. What I mean by by not letting it get sloppy is not so much that not so much about the simple line geometry, but whether these yarns are at an appreciably looser tension. And in fact, it feels to me like they are. So I just need to loosen up as I do more of this color. Just changing colors and changing the way I walked around the room and not paying enough attention is causing this slight difference in tension. And you can see that when I bounce, the first sections that I warped, they've got bounce in them, and they're hanging low. So part of this too is the fact that my warping peg is sitting lower, but it's more about even. So you do the best you can. This is not like winding a chain with a cross where you want every single thread to be at the exact same tension. Here, I'm going to get a little more loom waste, because I'm going to waste some of it tying on at the front of the loom, because that's where I will even everything up. But you do the best you can, and know that you can improve the evenness of your warp tension when you tie on at the front apron bar. So that, my friends, is direct warping if you haven't seen it before. It's fun, it's fast, it's easy. It gives you a chance to play some more with your colors and yarns if that's what you want to do.